NBA Insider sends a warning to the rest of the NBA as it seems like the Miami Heat are being overlooked and disrespected as we go into this 2024-2025 NBA season. We'll break down the quote and what this means going forward for this Miami Heat team on this episode of Heat Digest. So let's not waste any time and get right to it. You cannot forget about this Heat team, and that's what it feels like is going on. Due to the lack of transactions made this offseason by this Miami Heat team, it seems like everyone is really just skipping right over this Miami Heat team when going into a preview of what next year is going to look like at the top of the Eastern Conference. Shout out to Zach Lowe as he's come out on his podcast and said, don't skip over this Miami Heat team. They are still very much a threat. As shout out to Emo Jimmy on Twitter, he quotes the Zach Lowe podcast saying, Zach Lowe on the Miami Heat being in the same tier as the Pacers, going on to say, and I quote, I know everyone's down on the Heat. Are they going to pull another rabbit out of a hat? Never sleep on the Heat. Jimmy plus Bam plus Spo and a good supporting cast. They belong in the same tier. Never sleep on the Heat. And that's the end of the quote from the Zach Lowe podcast. And again, Zach Lowe is very good at what he does, covering the game of basketball at a high level. But again, he's not wrong here. This Miami Heat team, despite not going out and making a massive splash, whether it be in free agency or making a big trade, they are still very, very good from top to bottom on when you look at this roster, at least on paper. Obviously, when it gets to the actual point of playing basketball on the hardwood, if the roster is healthy, I don't see how this roster does not compete with every team in the Eastern Conference and maybe even the entire NBA, as there's scoring, there's defense, and it's a lot of young pieces as well as being diverse with a bunch of older pieces that have the experience, have the playoff experience in the championship runs. So again, now let's break down really what is going to look different from last year and this year. And I do have to bring up the standings from last season, as this was a rat race. We used that term last year towards the end of the year. The Miami Heat obviously ending in the 8th spot last year with 18 games back from the number 1 seed Boston Celtics. But again, if we look at the rest of the teams just directly ahead of us, the 76ers, 1 game ahead of us. The Indiana Pacers the Orlando Magic all tied with the Philadelphia 76ers, 17, just 1 game ahead of this Miami Heat team. So just 1 game in separation between us, the 7th, 6th, and even the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference. That is huge. And then the change doesn't even get any more drastic, as from that to the 4th seed in the Cleveland Cavaliers is 1 more game, as they are just 16 games back from the Boston Celtics. And then again, Milwaukee's 15 games back and the New York Knicks are 14 games back. The end of this Eastern Conference race all came down to the last week, if not 2 weeks, and it came down to who is going to win more consecutively. And again, if you look at the streak, you see the New York Knicks won 5 games in a row. That's the biggest streak outside of the Philadelphia 76ers, who we all know went on a fantastic run and really just they put their foot down and declared that they were going to get in, winning consecutive games, 8 of them to be exact. And again, they won 8 of their last 10 games. But again, the New York Knicks, everyone outside of, I guess, the 76ers, if they would have made a big run like that, like the New York Knicks did, they would have found themselves at the top of the Eastern Conference, obviously outside of the 1 seed, as no one was going to catch Boston. But again, the whole point is this Eastern Conference was so competitive. Maybe it wasn't the most elite level basketball for multiple reasons. Multiple teams had big injuries and they had their star players out for long periods of time, if not just their star players, but multiple players on that roster that make an impact, a significant impact at that, obviously, but it was more than one team, so it was relatively fair, and because of that, it was still ultra competitive. Obviously, Boston was very healthy and very contempt and really just put together from the start of the season, and they were able to go throughout the entirety of the season playing championship level basketball without having to really hard reset for injuries or missed time by anyone. But again, if the Miami Heat can be in this type of rat race next year, they can definitely find themselves at the top of the Eastern Conference. We said it last year. It's just we never were able to stay healthy for long periods of time. I know looking at this roster, it looks a lot like last year with just a few different additions with Pelle Larsson, Alec Burks. Obviously, Josh Richardson was on this roster last year, but we lost him at the halfway point against that Boston Celtics team, and we never saw him return in that entire season. Obviously, Khalil Ware will be here. And it's going Nasir Little, obviously our newest addition. I think this team could definitely make a run. And if we're in comparison to the Indiana Pacers, obviously only one game difference, 47 wins and 35 losses to the Miami Heat's 46 wins and 36 losses. It's going to be competitive. Obviously, they got Miles Turner around the halfway point last year, and they really didn't make any big moves this offseason as well as the Miami Heat. Obviously, they have 3 new acquisitions, whether they be undrafted or drafted players from this past year's draft. But then the contract extensions are the only other thing that they really did this offseason. So no major acquisitions outside of Miles Turner from Pascal Siakam from the Toronto Raptors last mid-season. So again, the contract extensions to Andrew Nembhard, TJ McCollum, Obi Toppin, and Pascal Siakam, that is fine and dandy for those Pacers, but again, they did not go out and grab new talent that is going to make a big splash. Obviously, the young players that they drafted this past June 26th, June 27th can make an impact, but we can't expect them to be world beaters on an Indiana Pacers team that it may be even hard to find minutes to play in because of how they played last year and the amount of talent they had returned from the team last year. Offensively, they were the best team in the league. It was not close from the first game of the season until game 82. The Indiana Pacers were the best the best offense in the league, and it wasn't close. They were outscoring teams 146 out of 140. It was a very, very close game night in and night out because they weren't defending anyone, and it was just a track race every single time they touched the basketball. So again, if they continue that brand of basketball, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, as the Miami Heat last year were top 4 in NBA defense, in the defense leaders, only giving up about 108.5 points per game. So best defense against the best offense, those matchups are going to continue to be competitive. And if I'm going to be honest with you, I'd rather have the top defense than the top offense. Because if we have the top defense, we don't have to score as much. There's not as much pressure on our offense if we continuously can get stops on the defensive end, whether it be against an elite offense or a mediocre offense. Things can really turn up, and we can get running in transition. We can get free, easy baskets without having to rely in half-court sets that we saw last season were not very successful for this Miami Heat team, again, whether or not it be due to injury or not. So, again, this is going to be a very competitive very competitive league this season. Again, I can't wait to see how it plays out. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think it's going to look a lot like last season's standings, or do you think the Miami Heat are going to be able to make a push at the top, if not the middle of these standings, maybe where Cleveland was last year, around the 50-win mark would be massive. Obviously, only 2 teams in the Eastern Conference won 50 or more games, that being New York and Boston, the 1 and 2 seed. I think Miami could definitely make a run at 47 to 50 wins next season, and I think they can be anywhere from the 4th through the 6th seed as long as we do not lose consecutive games against teams like Washington, against teams like the Charlotte Hornets. If we can win those games and beat up on the bad teams in the Eastern Conference specifically, I think this can be a very successful year for this Miami Heat team, and I think they would be very competitive with the Indiana Pacers once again, and I can't wait to see how it plays out. Last year, a lot of these season series came down to the playoffs, in the sense that whoever won those season series is probably going to have a leg up in the playoffs due to having the home court advantage, and really just having that, if it does come down to a tiebreaker, winning that tiebreaker due to the season series. So I can't wait to see how that all plays out, and thanks for watching this episode of Heat Digest. I will see you guys on the next one.